Welcome to another session of the You've Learn Free YouTube channel. Today we're going to be, and this is part of a journey that we're going on at the moment. So we're starting on a journey, and today we're going to take the first steps, and we're going to answer the question: what is education, and why should I get one? As usual, Josua is with me, and so that's I don't really have much more to say. Then we're going to discuss this very fundamental issue, and we're going to see where it leads us, and perhaps have a little bit of a back and forth. And so I hand it over to you to say hi, Josua, and carry on.
Hello. Okay, so I think I want to open with sort of the normal idea. The initial idea you have with education is something you go and get. You go out in the world and you go get your education. You learn something from someone, and it's usually, at least in my experience, associated with getting a job one day. That's sort of the big goal of most people when they think of initial education. And so, but I would argue an important way of thinking about education is thinking about two parts of it. So the first part would be as how you do things, so how you get wherever you want to go. That would be skill acquisition, etc. And the other part would be actually orienting yourself. Where are you going, or at what are you aiming? Both of those things could be classified as part of education. And I think it's useful to look at two quick ways of talking about it. So the one definition that I heard of, I recently encountered on a YouTube channel about education, is this guy was speaking and he said, education on a subject has only to do with increasing awareness and comprehension of factual information on a subject, regardless of personal belief or practices of either the students or teachers. So that's sort of the idea of how sort of separating education from morals or from values, separating it away from what your personal opinions are and just talking about information or facts. But etymologically, the word education, now this is just Wikipedia, is derived from the Latin word, perhaps Christopher would be able to say it better, but it's educato, and that has sort of the idea of a breeding or a bringing up or a rearing. So that's very much linked to growth. And educo, that's another word for training. And these are all related to leading something forth or taking something out or raising it up or like lifting, building something. And so that has sort of a more value-based and sort of human aspect to it. And I think the discussion in my eyes today would be, how much can we actually separate the factual part from the values part? And that will give us a better indication of what is education really and how important it would be for you to get it. I think that's sort of my premise for what we're talking about today. Can you separate it, and how much?
So I'm going to look up the definition quickly. I'm going to look up the etymology quickly, because my etymology is slightly different from yours. Okay. But so what I'll ask you to do is, set out what you think about it, and then I'll respond to that.
So what I think,
so how do you define it? Because you've told us how other people define it, but that's not how you define it. And clearly, your definition.
I like the etymological definition, and that is, it is the raising up of a person. Now, to what you raise that person up has two aspects, in my opinion. It is firstly what the person can do practically in the world. So you can raise someone up to be a baker. You raise them up to have that skill set and that capacity in the world. But secondly, you raise them up also in how he's going to interact on a value system, what he values, what he thinks is worthwhile, and how he conducts himself, not just in literal sense, but also in a spiritual sense. And I would say the education is the whole of that raising up. Now, you might in some institutions separate away or try to separate away the value side and only focus on the skill part, say teaching someone how to bake, without say for example, valuing taste. So it's only the motions, and you don't care why they bake. You don't care if they actually believe that there's some deeper meaning to food or whatever. You just care that they can do it. So I would say that is sometimes done in split, but I would say education is that whole, that raising up of a being to be able to stand in a certain way in the world. So having skills and having values, and that would be it.
Okay, so I'm going to differ from you.
Great. That's the idea.
So to go back to the etymological definition, you can draw a distinction in educare, C-A-R-E, and educare, C-E-R-E. The Latinists in my family will correct me. And what you have to do then is look at the real definition of education in this sense is which means to lead out of.
Yes,
or to lead. Now, you can have two types of leading. You can have the leading, as in the Pied Piper of Hamelin, who leads the rats and plays a tune. But that's not the leading that we mean here. So when we talk about leading, it's in a, I think, the classical formation had a slightly different meaning. And the best analogy would be that of a doctor, or the job of a doctor. So the point is that the human body tends towards growth and development, or to use a fairly technical sense, in the most technical sense, it tends towards perfection. And we've covered this before, but it's important to just say about perfection here. We don't mean Superman or running the mile in 4 minutes or anything like that. What we actually mean is the perfection, to reach your complete personal development. So, if I'm most probably never going to run the mile in 4 minutes.
My grandfather did that.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, your grandfather.
Maybe I can if I work really hard, but I doubt it.
So that was his. So he was able to achieve that level of perfection in athletics. But I would most probably, no matter how hard I work, be able to achieve that. I may be able to do other things, but I won't be able to achieve that. So this does not mean Superman. It means what every person can best achieve.
In himself, the best he can
in himself, the full development of your person. So the full development of the person is, so the doctor works towards the full development. So the body naturally grows, naturally moves towards perfection. You could almost call it the body is programmed towards perfection, to reach a certain height, to reach all these things, to reach a certain state of health. And education and the leading that the doctor accompanies you with on that is to actually assist you with that natural development. So the educator is the midwife of the process, or the midwife of knowledge. So that's one thought to keep in mind. And then the second.
Let me just, can I raise a disagreement on this point? So the reason I won't define it exactly that way is, to me, my personal experience of learning and growing in who I am as an educated person has always felt very much also a continual choice of what I will not do because I don't have enough time. So I think of a child or as this person this being who has a lot of potential of what different kinds of things he could become, but he can't do all of them. It's not possible for him to do all of them. So he has to pick some specific direction. So yes, the body has the capacity to reach some perfection, but if you dedicate your life to, for example, wrestling, then you're not dedicating it to badminton. And you're not going to reach the maximum potential that you could have reached in badminton if you had picked badminton instead of wrestling at the beginning. Maybe you could be equally good at both. For example, A.B. de Villiers was an excellent cricket player, but he was also, I think, swimming or something. I can't remember what the other sport was.
Hockey.
Yeah, he's also really great at that, and he had to pick.
So
that's why. So that's why there is some part of it that isn't just the natural tendency of where you are going to go in any case, because you have to pick where you are going to go.
Yeah, I'm not saying that it's predetermined and there's no choice in that, because obviously there are many factors. But the second distinction that we have to make is between education and formation. Okay. Now, education is education, and so to make this distinction, let's follow one route and say, what is education? Education is concerned with the development of the intellect.
Yes.
Okay. So AB de
or
Villiers
at
is
least something that's an activity which is very much linked to the intellect.
No.
So you would not define, say, some level of artistic woodwork or something that's some motor skills like painting or music as part of education.
No. None of those are part of education.
So music, neither. Okay.
Music is not part of it. Music is the case example, and we'll come to the distinction right now. Okay. So education is purely about the development of the intellect. Okay. And I'll show you why this starts limiting down choices as well. Because in this, you don't really have a choice in the sense of there's a duty for you to develop your intellect, whereas there's no duty for me to play badminton, right? As opposed to wrestling, for example. Okay, so then we have to ask what is the object of education? Okay, and once defining it as the development of the intellect. So if we define education as development of the intellect and the intellect solely, and I'll cover these other issues. We'll cover those other issues later. Then we come. There's a distinct, and will this rest or is related to distinction between science and art. Okay, so the way we have this today is where we say, oh, Joshua is a scientific person, okay, and Christopher most probably is artistic, okay, and I did a degree in arts and you did a degree in science, okay, and actually we all now, the consequence of the last 120, maybe more than that, the consequence of the Enlightenment is that is science is good and the arts is arty-farty, to use the expression, okay. But that's actually not what art, science, and arts means. Science comes from the word scientia, which means knowledge. Mm-hmm. And arts comes from ars, and it's related to artifice. And artifice does not mean, or artificial, which does not mean that it is something false, but that it is something that is the work of human hands.
So the art, that's why it's called the artisans, which do the manual work. Yes.
Yeah, but that's all. Things. But also, so people don't get snobby. That's also, so piano playing is a classic example of this distinction of an art. So there's the science of piano playing, which is the knowledge of how to play the piano, and the knowledge of how to move your hands, and the knowledge of how to read music. Okay, but the mere possession of that knowledge does not mean that you possess the art of piano playing, because the art is the ability to do something easily, and in a sense almost without thought. Although that's not the strict definition, but essentially it's like driving the other good example would be driving a car. So at the very beginning of the instruction in driving the car, and that's why you have a learner's license and a driver's license to distinguish the two. So there's the science of driving the car, which covers the rules of the road, what the pedals are, etc. And then there's the art of driving the car, in which some of us are more perfect than others. I'm one of those who's less perfect. Most probably because I'm too abstracted while driving the car. But the perfection.
I've driven with you and you keep a full philosophical conversation going while driving through Johannesburg.
So the issue,
not pausing for a beat.
It's not as bad as a friend of mine He was completely abstracted, and you kind of want to pull his arm as he kind of went
Turn!
straight around the corner. Yeah, but he was a mathematician, so that's a different.
Okay.
That's a different thing. And I can still remember car journeys with him right now from 30 years ago, which were quite harrowing. But I'm certainly in that category, but not as bad as that. So the issue is, but the serious point about it is that's the art of driving the car, and so Lewis Hamilton or whoever, they have mastered the art of driving the car and the science of it. And that's this, and also then that undermines this myth of right and left brain thinking. And that's actually what. So this is quite a philosophical.
Okay, let's just pause and say I think these are good definitions to accept about education, and it's a useful way to continue moving forward. Although I think the usage like this has a bit fallen by the wayside, and lots of people don't use it this way anymore.
Absolutely.
So, but it is it's a more useful way of going forward. So I'll accept this definition and go forward on them. But then I would just like to have another way of speaking about the whole of forming a person. If we are making a word for the individual part, because education has become this word that people use to talk about the entire formation, because it Nelson Mandela's famous quote about education is the great thing to change the world. And then it is applied to things that, by this definition that you have just given, which I think is very useful, would not be education. So we have to pick another word so that we can have education.
So the other word, and you used it is formation.
Yes.
Now what formation does, formation has two other components. It has the physical perfection of the person.
Okay. So that's being healthy and being able to physically doing things. That might include wrestling.
Yeah. And that might include wrestling or hockey or whatever. Yes. Okay. And of course we could say that we have a certain duty to care for our bodies. Okay. And that's a universal thing that we should work towards. And we can make lots of arguments about why that's true. You could then doubt that.
I think it's almost universally accepted, so we can just continue.
And then obviously you have elements of that are choice and therefore recreation, and that's wonderful. And that also has many other values. And then you have for moral formation. And why the distinction? The distinction is because to know the good is not to do the good.
Yes, that is true.
So I can have a full, so you can carry on.
Yeah, well, it's a very easy example is you might know it's against university policy to plagiarize from another student, but then you still do it.
Not to use an example that's been relevant in this week at all.
Not at all.
So just for background, you were involved in a scandal, and you were able to clear your name, but it was a very harrowing experience.
I backed up some of my university programming work to GitHub, and it was public for a short period of time, and somehow another student had, in that period of time, it was a few days, found it somehow and copied my code, and I don't even know the person. So I had to prove that it was my work, and it was a bit of a story. But yeah, in any case, everyone tells you at university, don't do this, don't plagiarize. It's wrong. People still do it. I mean, that's an easy hands-on example.
Yeah. So the point is that's a good example, because actually because if we analyze it, then we have to let's look at the plagiarizer, and we can say that he hasn't been trained morally in how to resist the temptation of plagiarism.
Yes, because that was my fault in the matter. Is I tempted this student who had access to GitHub to use my code because I hadn't hidden it perfectly. If I had never had it public for a short period of time, it couldn't have happened. So there was still some, even though it's not necessarily a fault, I could have handled myself a bit better and had made it impossible. So that would have been a better way for me to act in it. But yes, like you said, he hasn't been trained in resisting that slight temptation.
Yeah, and so that's also the sense in which, and I'm sure it's a quote you want to use. It's the whole, and that's sometimes the confusion that's created when people talk about, and I can't think of the particular biblical quote, but about training up children. And
in the way they must go.
Yeah, and that's got more to do with. So that is not about exclusively education. Yes. That is about formation.
It's not about education when we define it as nicely and usefully as we do it now, because that's an interesting thing about words is words die in a sense. We have a very useful term, and then we start using it outside of its designated field or whatever it was intended for, and then we just lose a lot of its power. For example, a good example would be a paradox. A paradox is a contradiction it's something that looks like a contradiction but isn't. But now people frequently use it for contradictions. So the point is, the older term is really useful to use the word formation instead of education and education, and that's why you would think, because we are using education as formation now, that verse applies to education, and it does, but not only to it.
Exactly. And of course you're a fan of C.S. Lewis, and Lewis's book Studies in Words deals with this concept of verbicide, of how words get killed, and they move from having an intellectual content to an emotional content, and then once their content is primarily emotional, we must find then more emotional words to replace them. So part of clearing our thinking up, and part of our duty to clear our thinking up, is to actually look at words and look at because the meaning that they acquired over 1,700 years or 2,000 or 3,000 years doesn't, but even more than that, they've been constantly tested. So there's a process of, you can call it the tradition of language, a process of constant refinement and testing whether these are the good definitions and the good distinctions. So for a quick example would be, there's the great scholastic definition which says, define always, distinguish often, assert rarely. And what we of course do is we do almost the opposite. We assert all the time, we say what is true, we distinguish between things rarely, and we almost never define. So while this may, and what I will say about it is, while this may seem to be a little bit of and while this is a discussion.
Just repeat the scholastic quote again.
It says, define always, distinguish often, assert rarely.
Okay.
So and that's almost the inverse of our public thought processes today, because we assert all the time, but we're often not talking about the same thing. We're asserting about something completely different.
Yeah, I have a great example about that sort of kind of situation occurring. There's a story about, I can't remember which philosopher used this example. Maybe I'll put it in the bottom if I can find it. But in any case, there are these campers in the woods, right? And they saw a squirrel, on a tree. And the one guy wants to see the squirrel, so he's walking around the tree. But as he's walking around, the squirrel also walks around. So he never sees the squirrel. And so then the question is, did he walk around the squirrel or not? Right? And then half of the group argues and says he doesn't walk around the squirrel. And the other half says, yes, he walked around the squirrel. Right? Now, it's easy to see why they're different. The one group sees him walking in a circle, and the squirrel is in the center of the circle the whole time, even though he's also moving a circle, so he walked around him. And the other group sees him doing this, right? The squirrel and him, so he's not going around the squirrel. But they'll argue for hours about this, but they're not arguing about did the squirrel go around. They're actually only arguing about which is the correct definition to use now. They're not arguing about anything.
Yeah,
and that's exactly what happens the whole time.
Yeah. And that's why we started this discussion, is that we said, let's define first what we're going to talk about, and then we must critique that definition, and then look at how and then we can start making distinctions. Well, we have made some distinctions because we've distinguished.
Great ones. Thanks for bringing this to light. It definitely clarifies my thoughts on the matter. Yeah.
Oh, and by the way, this is not me at all. So this is just from
well,
this is just
you're pulling it out of me, but yes, it has a very long tradition behind it. Yes.
Okay, so I don't want it to make me
No.
make me appear clever or anything. It's just a superiority of access to resources.
Maybe you're just a little bit older than I am.
Yeah, just maybe a little bit. So the issue is that, that was a low blow, actually. That was really a low blow. So the point just, that was like the backhand compliment. So the issue is, but I think and this may sound like a completely esoteric discussion that we're having right now. Maybe this should have been at the beginning, but whatever, this is for the people who are going to persevere, right? So people who are going to persevere is when we get to the end, not necessarily of this discussion, but when we get to the end of this process, what we will understand is all sorts of practical things. And I'm always a great believer in this idea that there's nothing as practical as a good theory. But the point is, we're going to understand things like how to distinguish good from bad home education. Mm-hmm. We're going to be able to understand why in schools, pupil to teacher ratios are very important. And given that the syllabus isn't a constraint, because if you have a constraint on the level of the syllabus, it doesn't really matter it doesn't matter as much what your pupil to teacher ratio is. But if you've got a good syllabus, you will understand why it's almost impossible to teach. Or I suppose with a very good syllabus, you could do this, or with a very good approach, you could do this. But certainly in the conventional approach, you need to have very few students to ratio very few students to teachers, because we'll understand that, because once again, we're talking about a process of accompaniment, and you can't accompany 70 people. You can only accompany a relatively small group of people. Because each, and why, and what will
just
also
because of the time and spatial constraints that you have as a person accompanying another person.
Because of the very nature of the way in which children learn.
Okay. Well, we'll come back to this. Let's get to the theory that will help us to do this.
But those are the kind of practical things, and we will see why parents at a certain level are better educators than teachers. Mm-hmm. And we'll see what criteria you have to use to distinguish whether you have a good teacher or not. So there's a lot of, while this may seem very esoteric, there's a lot of very practical stuff, and a lot of the fundamental underpinnings of kind of these conventional statements that home educators and people in schools, parents can't teach, parents are the best teachers, all of those things. We'll come to understand
actually
what
all goes back to the definition of education. And
exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the argument everyone's arguing over here is a guy going around the school.
Absolutely. So,
but actually the argument is not about that. It's about definitions.
So let's use just to show the practicality of this. Let's use the classic recent, just before the coronavirus, whole fight over comprehensive sexual education. Okay. The essence of that fight was people took different positions, but no one realized that is actually not a matter for education. That is a matter for formation.
But that's the thing, right? It for them it is a matter of education, because they don't think of education as the definition we have of a mental education, but they actually think of formation, right? So it won't help us to tell them, right, no, but this isn't actually education, this is actually formation. They'll just say, well, then this is what we want to do in any case, right? So exactly, the fight's still there.
So the point is that that's exactly the point, and it's one of the big problems with the schooling system in South Africa. Is what we've done is we've collapsed. The schooling system performs many more formational tasks than or it performs a certain strong amount of education of formational tasks rather than purely educational tasks.
This is actually also where I wanted to go with my initial point that, the overlap in education. But it's just maybe I'm a few thousand years behind, eh?
No. You're quite right. Because the point is that, so it's important to distinguish those two, but it's also important to remember that while to know the good is not to do the good, it is difficult to do the good without knowing what the good is.
Yes.
So that's the other part.
Yes.
So there needs to be, so clearly part of education needs to be how to know what is good, to know what is the good, to know what is what is moral behavior.
Yes.
And that is also part of education, strictly speaking. But it's important not to do not confuse the two.
Okay, but here's an important question then, right? So I don't think my math professors, I'm thinking specifically of Harry Wiggins. He's a very passionate mathematician, quite a brilliant guy. I remember when we had tutorials with him, it's not nearly the tutorials that you would want it to be, like one-on-one, but it's quite small groups, and he sort of makes it into a real tutorial by actually, going one-on-one with you for a substantial amount of time, because it's really quick. In any case, the point is, if you made some mistake, say you're doing mathematics about sets and you say some point is equal to a set, that those things cannot be equal to each other, and you do that, he'll like freak out. He'll be like, "You can't do that. I mean, that's like the equal sign is a holy symbol. You can't." He doesn't like that at all. But he frequently, when he teaches math, he'll say things like, "Math is like music. You can't only know the theory. You have to practice. And so we cannot really separate, say, teaching children mathematics from practicing the art of doing mathematics. So in that sense, it's how do we then decide, we have this technical or definitional separation of education from art, but we cannot imagine a school where you only do the educational part. You have to do the art part of mathematics as well. Or how would that work?
No, so that's actually a valid distinction, and there's probably an internal distinction that we should make in terms of those arts which require the use of the body, and those which are more purely intellectual, like mathematics, and
the body is only there to write it down on paper to help you think a bit, but it's almost entirely mental exercise.
And then I think it's important also then to remember that there is that the mind is not divorced from the mind, intellectuals in the intellectual sense, is not divorced from the physical reality of the brain.
If you're tired, you can't think
exactly.
Straight.
Or when you're sleeping, you're not necessarily thinking in the conventional sense. So the issue there would be, why do you practice mathematics, which is also then part of developing the art of doing mathematics, but it's a more pure, is that builds the correct neural pathways to allow you to do it easily, and to do it easily and with ease and repetition. So that is also true, but there is a distinction between that and playing the piano.
But I think there's some level of that art. For example, now my experience with doing mathematics is when I do the art side of it, I practice something and I get a good internal handle of it. It sort of becomes part of you. Then you can actually go further mentally, because now you can see patterns you couldn't previously see, because you don't get stuck up on the small things anymore. So it is linked. We made this distinction, but it's only, I would say it's only our definitional distinction, separating the art from the education side, from the mental side, because our mental capacity has always been linked to us actually, acting something out, because you act the thought out, you interact with the world to do that. It's very
and I'd concede that. I would concede that, and it's maybe something we must look at. But I think the important thing is to make the distinction between 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 things that are that require this physical element, the external physical element, and things that are in a sense, well, I mean, this isn't pure because of course even you can even say writing by hand has a certain impact on the formation of the mind. But the issue is that in general,
I think I have an example of where we would want to draw the line. Now, you still use mathematics. When I remember, because you do a lot of maths and physics as well. I remember I was doing some of my first physics tutorials when I was in first year, and I could understand the theory quite well, but I wasn't getting the right answers yet. I wasn't doing the algorithm, or the hands-on part yet perfectly, and I wasn't there entirely yet. And there was another person who was also doing the sums, and they got like the perfect answers, and they were writing, very neatly and just doing the question really quickly and getting the answer. And I asked them to explain to me, how do you actually do this? I think I've got an idea, but I'm not there yet. Can you help me? And they said, no, they don't really know what's going on. They can just do it. Right? They've learned the formula and they can pump out the answer. And that's if that's not educational in the educational sense. They don't actually understand this. They understand lots of other parts of physics. I'm not telling you that this person isn't educated, but this specific problem, they had just memorized how to do it quickly, which is fine if you're doing lots of other things, but that's sort of, I think, what we would classify as the art part almost.
No, we must be careful there, because that would be an imperfect form of education.
But I mean let's say the art part, as I understood it, for example, part of I wrestled, so that's the sport I did most for the longest time. A big part of becoming good at this is doing lots of things so well and ingrained in you that you don't think about how you do them. You still think at a higher level in the sport, right? You are thinking. I'm not saying you don't think when you wrestle, but you think a lot more it's something you learn to do. It's something that becomes you. If you don't know, you can't think how you did what you did, but you did train to do that. And that's sort of how doing sums quickly is. Because there is a part of you that if you're doing physics, you have to think carefully about it. But it's really useful to know some of those algorithms and do them quickly, because it really helps you to not make mistakes and actually, go to the meat of the problem. You factorize something. You don't want to make a mistake factorizing. You don't want to think about it every time. You just want to do it because it helps you.
Okay. So let's just distinguish between how those two work together. So let's look at the wrestling example, right? So what you want to do in the wrestling example is you have these processes are not also necessarily, it's not like someone studies the piano by learning 3 years of theory and then that's the first time and then they go. So there's a constant interplay and interweaving between these two, which is why it makes it, I suppose, quite easy to confuse. So the issue is that in the wrestling example, what you do is you learn some of the holds or whatever at the beginning. You have a certain level of intellectual input, and then you begin this training, this bodily training. Eventually, what you want to do is you want as many elements. So it's, I think, the Gary Player thing where he says, the more the practice, the more I practice, the more lucky I get. Okay? But what we're really talking about there is that what's happening is that, even in technical terms, you're building up a certain non-cognitive muscle memory, right? And what that then is freeing the mind to do is think of the strategy of wrestling.
Exactly.
Okay. So that's what would happen in the wrestling example.
Yes.
But the wrestling example would still be distinguished from the maths example by the degree to which the activity is purely intellectual.
Physical. Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, was more intellectual. So the math. So that doesn't mean that we don't learn, because our brain is also a part of the body, and it would be strange to think that there's a complete difference between wrestling and mathematics. Okay, the difference is that the difference is that the process of training by which you make these, by which you practice. So it's not wrong to talk about the art of thinking, but it's important to keep that in the sense that by thinking a lot, you may think easily. And you may identify. So logic would be a good example.
Yes, you've seen this logical error before, for example, and then it's easier to see it the second time.
Yeah, and you're watching a politician on TV and you can say he's talking rubbish because you don't
have to think to do that. You can do that with the basic algorithm.
It's not. No, you see, this is a shocking bias against politics. Okay.
Just a little joke.
This is the uncritical use. Just exactly what you've done, right? Uncritical use of the word politics, not knowing its meaning. Then what we do is, then we say, oh, that's just politics, okay? And then we have politicians.
I think the word was politician, not politics.
Okay.
Because I think everyone is part of politics, but you're not necessarily a politician.
No, everyone is a politician. But the point is that. But the point is, you see, because you have emotive negative connotation to a word that means something completely different.
So it's a very good word to make a joke with. That's all.
Okay, no, I'm pulling your leg as well, but it actually is a serious point because what we do is at the end of the day.
But that's not what we're talking about today.
Yeah. But we have hundreds of people saying politics, hundreds of politicians saying, I'm not a politician. Okay. And then we've killed the word. We've killed the meaning of a word.
But we've already killed it, so maybe we should make a new word, but okay.
No,
it's so dead.
No, we're not. We must reclaim the real meaning of that word. Okay, but off the point in essence.
Okay, let's go back. Let's just concede that education and art, they are linked. There is definitely some interweaving. We're not claiming they're entirely separate, but it is really useful to say, is this mainly in the art subset or mainly in the education set? And these sets do overlap, but there is a sort of you can be more in the one than the other. And whenever you're more in the one, we call it education. Whenever you're more in the other one, we call it art. And from there on, we can continue.
Correct. And then to distinguish, and then the three things to distinguish, to understand that education is also, so formation is concerned with the moral, and there's an educational component
to moral.
There's an educational component to the moral, but there's also a behavioral component and a training component to the moral, so that's essentially, we can say the essential definition in that. Well, those are the definitions that relate to that.
Yeah,
I don't think you're going to buy into that this easily.
No, it's just a word. I mean, I think it's a more useful definition, so it's easy to buy into. But we can make it. You can say something else which I can disagree with, and we can keep it that. We can keep it interesting.
Okay, so let's think. So I think the thing is, So I suppose actually that's essentially the things that we should define. I don't know if that would help people a lot in terms of practicality right now. So we.
I think it would help. I think it would help. I think the reason I think it would help to think about it this way is to, and that's why I still want to ask my initial question, and that is, how much can you, in a human being, actually separate these things? So because we can separate it in our minds, we think we can necessarily separate it in practice as well. Now, yes, we can. I definitely think we can to some extent. But I think we overestimate how far we can separate, for example, the moral from the intellectual. I think there is a practical level at which it is hard to separate it. And the reason would be the following. I'm at university and I'm working hard to learn the work. But there's always a reason for me doing that, right? I could either be doing it because, I'm afraid I'm going to get in trouble with my family if I do badly, or because, I just like to see I just like having high marks because I want to have them. I haven't thought further about it, or maybe because I really want to show the professor that I'm actually learning. You know, I've got a more personal sort of link with the person teaching me, and I want to show them that I'm actually engaged. So there is always this sort of motivation behind it. Maybe I just want to be rich one day, you know? I want to get a good job, so I want to get high grades. So that just means that it's never possible to entirely separate it in a human being, these things from each other, because the other things are going to sort of be there still, because you're a person and you always have them all together.
Okay, so let's. I think you're getting onto actually the point that I want to get in, and I think we should maybe discuss this, and then we can close this discussion.
Yes.
So the question then is really, what is the end of education, or what is the purpose of education? So let's just
not formation,
talk about what
education. Yes.
Education. Okay. So not formation, education. Although this is also the purpose of all these other things as well. Actually, it's actually true for all of these, right? Or when we get there, we'll see how it's true for all of them. We'll test. Let's test at the end.
Okay. Let's assert that it's true for education first. It's an easier thing to.
But let's examine. We're not asserting. Let's examine it, and then we can see how we go from there. Because we must assert really.
We've only done it once.
So now we're defining. So now we're going to narrow this down, and we're going to look at education. We're going to look at the end of education.
Okay.
Now the question there. So let's look at the conventional argument. So the conventional wisdom, as we have it today, the cause of the demise of the university, if we want to go into that debate, is the issue that we believe that education goes something like this, or that we should do this. We should go to school.
Mm-hmm.
We should go to school to get very good marks.
Mm-hmm.
We should use those. We must get into the best universities with those very good marks.
Mm-hmm.
When we get into the best university with those very good marks, we should get very good marks at university.
Mm-hmm.
And then we should, with those very good marks, get the very best job to get us the highest salary, to make the most money, so that we can then
send our kids to the best schools.
So that we can have our children, so that we can send our children to perhaps better schools than we went to, so they can get very high marks, and from the best schools go into the best universities and then get the best jobs.
Okay.
That would be the conventional argument for what is the end of education. Okay, so I'm assuming that that's not an example that you would use.
No, I don't think that's a good end. I think it's a...
So you want to tell me what the end of education is?
When I go back to the end of education, I go back to the definition I gave in the beginning, even though we started using a different one, because I think all these things act together. So we took the thing I called education, we named it formation, right? And we said, okay, it has these subsets, you know, art, the person, etc., all of these things, and education, the mental as well. So I still think all these things go to the same end, which I originally thought the thing I called education would go, because it's a part of this whole thing. And that is, I would say it is, the end of education is for you to go in the right direction in the world. This is speaking figuratively, and to do that well. Now,
or with ease, or you mean with ease, or you mean with ease, or to do it well? I'm not sure, because well has perhaps a moral element to it. If we, depending on which word you
well, I would say ease seems a bit wrong. So if I mean it, doing it well in a technical sense. So not a technical, like an art sense. If I do a wrestling move well, it might be easier than any other way to do that specific move, but it might not still be easy to do it right.
Right.
So
let's say,
that's what I mean by well. So the one is the direction is the moral sense, going the right place, right? And then the how you do it is the practical sense. So to actually act out right. So that's what I would say the end of it is. The end of it is to be going in the right direction. That is a moral question or a spiritual question. What is the right direction for a human being to move into? That is where you want you to be going, because otherwise, what's the point of doing anything well if you're going in the wrong direction, right? You know, maybe you're doing really well with your mathematics, but you're building gas chambers, you know, building something.
Well, that's the example. The Germans were very good.
Yeah,
the German scientists were very good at building gas chambers and
fancy airplanes, you know, fast planes, and I mean admirable that's doing something well, but they're not going in the right direction. So the end of
Hey,
education.
We brought up Hitler again. All internet debates come down to Hitler, right? But yeah, sorry.
Okay.
Actually, I'm throwing you off the track there. But two funny things. One funny thing is that, it's Karen, and I'll tell you.
So that would be the end of education is raising this person up, and partially raising yourself up, because I'm not saying education is only from the outside. I think there's a part where you could argue that you're partaking in it. So raising yourself up to stand upright, do whatever you're doing well. You could have the image of walking, climbing over things that are in your way, and doing that efficiently and correctly, but then also walking in the right direction. That is the end of education.
Yeah. So we're saying so actually let's just say efficiently and effectively.
Yes.
That's what we're talking about. Okay, that's fine. I can buy that.
So efficiently, effectively going in the right direction in life.
Well, effectively covers the right direction. Because you can be efficiently walking in the wrong direction, but it will not achieve the effect.
Yes.
So if my effect is to go to Johannesburg or to go to Pretoria, but I can do that efficiently, right? I can walk efficiently at good speed and with correct pace, but I would not be doing it effectively because if I had the wrong direction, I'd be heading for Vereniging.
But you might think it's effective if you think you're going in the right direction. So,
no, of course. But I mean, then I'm delusional.
I agree.
I mean, then I've either I'm mistaken, or I'm delusional. Okay.
Yeah.
But I don't.
So let's say efficiently and effectively.
I have to use the joke. So the joke goes. So there's a satirical a guy who writes these satirical songs, and wrote it in the 50s, and maybe we'll link to it because it's actually quite funny. But it's about the German scientist Werner von Braun, who worked at Peenemünde and built the V1 and the V2 rocket, which were used to bomb England.
Yes.
And then he fled to the American zone. And the Americans used his knowledge to work with them in order to develop the Saturn V rockets, etc.
Oh, really? Okay, cool. Yeah.
Okay, and so Werner von Braun, and so there's a very satirical song which says, which basically goes along the lines of we'll actually link it. I'll send it to you so you can link it. It says, I work on sending up the rockets, but where they come down is not my department, says Werner von Braun.
Yeah. And it's really easy to end up in that place, I think, in life. To be doing something really well and not knowing even what this is going to do in the long run. It might be something, maybe you're a programmer and you're working on something like Facebook, and the argument can be made that it has done more harm than good, right? Or you understand what I'm saying? That's the company you're working at, and maybe it isn't the right thing to do. Maybe it is, but it's debatable. The point is, any profession can end up in such a kind of place.
Okay, so so we don't make too many deviations, because as you know, I can drive across Joburg and we can have a 2-hour philosophical conversation looking for restaurants. so let's just go quickly to this one and say, I want you to restate your definitions, and then I'm going to test them because I don't think that they're right.
Great. I knew that. I knew that you were going to disagree. So I said my definition is going in the right direction in life and doing so efficiently.
Okay. You're confusing the journey with the end. Where are you going to?
So I don't think the reason I don't think I'm confusing the journey with the end, because I think the end in this is having the person who can do the journey well. So, because you don't know when your end is going to be. When are you going to die? So, So the end is having. So yes, it might seem like I'm saying the end is the journey. I'm saying the end is having this creature, this human being who is capable of efficiently traveling in the right direction. So he is the end of education, this being that travels like this. I'm not saying the end is to travel. I'm saying to be capable of traveling this way is the end.
Okay, so that actually will take a little bit of thinking about why that would be why? So we could go one of two routes here. I could assert something and you could challenge it.
Yes, we can do that.
Uh,
Let's see how
and
much it differs.
I think so. I'm going to think about that for a little while and see why. I don't think that's correct, but I can't think right now in the course of the conversation why that's incorrect. So we'll think about that later. So I'll assert something. I'm going to say the end is happiness. The end of education is to know is to know how to be happy.
Can you be happy? So is it a bigger subset than my definition, or smaller subset, or is it a set and my definition is a subset, or the other way around, or are they not even overlapping?
You think like a mathematician.
I do this a lot in computer science. It's not even math. It's just.
So the point would be your definition is contained within that definition because there's nothing that stops you while you're on the journey.
But isn't that then a less useful definition? I mean, shouldn't we try to, because we made education as small a definition as possible, shouldn't we try to keep the end as small as possible and only grow it to contain anything that is necessarily to be part of it? Because
why would happiness not be part of the?
No, because happiness could be argued to be the end of everything.
So I agree with you. Happiness is the end of everything.
Okay, but then it's not so. I mean, I'm trying to think. I think it's more useful. Let's say continue using sets. We have the set of end, which is let's say the argument is the end of everything is happiness. Let's assume that is correct. Now we have the subset, these other area that maps to happiness. So you can get from here, if you do this correctly, you can get to happiness. Okay, but I argue that one of these things can't take you to happiness entire. It can only partially take you to happiness. You have to have all these mappings. You have to have education and moral mapping and all these other mappings together can take you to happiness. So let's say then it would be more useful to say education maps to what subset of happiness or what part that gives you happiness in the end, instead of just saying happiness entire.
No, what I'm saying is the definition of happiness, the definition of education, the purpose of it. Remember, it's not the happiness that's the end. It's knowing, because it's about an intellectual thing.
So it's
about knowing what to do to be happy. So the end of education is knowing what is required to be happy.
Okay, so that may be why. Okay, but I still think that my definition is then more useful, because maybe I'm then answering the question. I'm saying I've already said this is the education that you will learn to be happy. It would be to actually efficiently walk in the right direction. So I would say this is a prerequisite to be happy, and that is what education takes you to. I'm not saying that's happiness entire. It has other components to it as well, but I don't think you can be truly happy without at least doing that. I think education leads directly to that.
Okay, I'm losing it a little bit, but maybe we shouldn't get in. But the point is that essentially...
Yeah, maybe I'm not articulating it well yet, but yeah.
But what I'm essentially saying is that happiness is so the purpose of education is to teach you, or for you to know what is required to be happy. And so I would argue like this. I would say all humans...
I think the only reason... Yeah, sorry. Give your argument first.
I would argue this. All humans seek to be happy. Okay.
Yes.
All humans seek to be happy.
I don't know. It's a hard thing to assert, but let's say at least most.
Okay. I would say that all humans seek to be happy.
Okay.
Some humans equate happiness purely with pleasure.
Okay.
But they're still seeking happiness, but this is a kind of a lower level of happiness. Okay. So we were talking about perfection. They haven't fully developed. Okay. So there's I'll use an interesting real world parallel, which is that it would appear, from what we know from the research, is that that your mental development essentially stops when you start taking recreational drugs. And that in general, your full development, emotional, etc., is in many ways effectively arrested, and when you take recreational drugs.
Well, it doesn't necessarily feel to people that way.
No, it doesn't feel to you, but the point is the people outside recognize it, right? That you can't, that you have, so the issue there with pleasure would be you so crave, like a child would crave a sweet, you so crave the drug that you're willing to do all sorts of things, dangerous things, to acquire it, right? That and you know, and you even most probably know that it will not ultimately lead to happiness, but you lost all of that intellectual ability to see the end. So the issue is that so what I would argue is that the end, all people seek happiness. Some people never transcend pleasure, but that is still, in a sense, a subset of happiness, in a sense, if you have to use sense.
Sets are very useful things.
There are some dangers, but we will discuss them another time. But
there are dangers with every useful thing.
So the issue is that, so that would be the end, is I would say that all humans seek happiness. If all humans seek happiness, then the main purpose of education is for you to know how to be happy.
The only reason I don't like the definition is because I don't think everyone agrees, and I'm not even sure if I can know that happiness and whatever is right always overlap so obviously to you. Now, it might in the end really overlap, and I do think it in the end really overlaps. So if you do what is right, your duty, it will also lead to happiness. But I think it's almost more useful to keep the duty and the happiness in your eyes at the same, in front of your vision at the same time, because of your human tendency to not really know that duty also leads to happiness. And but that's maybe just a practical thing.
I think what you're doing is, what you're doing in your mind is you keep thinking back. You're not keeping education separate enough from formation. So formation is also important, right? Because the point is that, so let's take the drug addict example. The drug addict must also be subject to correct formation, and the drug addict must also be subject to and it may even be useful for the drug addict to be subject to certain forms of physical training, okay, in order to achieve physical perfection. And in fact, the doctor may prescribe, so let's say the heroin, I don't know how effective this therapy is, so I can't, so don't take this as a kind of recommendation, right? But what I'm saying is, the doctor may even provide, if you're a heroin addict, the doctor is helping you to achieve physical perfection, okay, or the ordered physical functioning of your body, may prescribe methadone in order to assist you to break, I don't know if it does this, but I'm assuming in order to assist you to break the heroin addiction, because that addiction obviously has a physical and it has a psychological and possibly even to a certain extent a moral component. But the point is that if the drug addict doesn't know that taking heroin is bad for him, right? He can't proceed. Even the success of either the moral formation or the physical training or physical assistance that the doctor would give him would not assist him to overcome the drug addiction, unless he knew that so this is almost like, you have to think of this in a very basic philosophical.
In my definition, again, because I said in the beginning, I'm using the formation one to say that happiness, that education is part of doing that. But you're trying to say you're just saying, it's about walking efficiently in the right direction, but that takes formation and all these other things. It's about formation. That's not education. Education is the part in that being that knows what is the right direction and what is the way to do it. And so I think I would accept your definition of the purpose of education if we augment it slightly and say it is to learn what is right, and that this will lead to happiness.
But I would not argue with that at all, because what you're learning is so I'm not saying there's no moral component to education, but I'm saying that the moral component is intellectual.
Yes, I agree. So I just feel uncomfortable with having that word happy alone. I think even though philosophically and technically or definitionally it might be fine, I think it maybe obfuscates the true meaning of what we're saying.
No. So let's state it clearly. What we're saying is but the qualifier here is to know. So
yes.
the purpose of education, and it's almost a circular definition, because education, if we define it correctly, can never be more than to know, because that's the definition of education. So education
is the act of coming to, or the process by which you come to know. So that's why it won't be circular.
Well, yeah. Well, no. I think we may have stretched the definition slightly, but the point is that the issue here is that education is to know.
Okay.
It's all about intellectual. It's all about an intellectual activity. It's to know the. So I would not like the use of act, because that then implies a physical activity, perhaps too much. But it's to know it's to know how to do, or it's to know how to achieve happiness. But that doesn't mean that if I know how to achieve happiness, I'm going to achieve it. That just means that I know how to do it. So to use your analogy, it would be if I would like to walk to Pretoria, practically.
I still go back to
let's say Pretoria is happy.
The reason I still don't like it is if we put, I think the fact that the right thing will lead to happiness is part of what you learn. That's part of what you can reach by education, because it's a truth, but it's not necessarily self-evident. There are many people who believe that what is right and what is true does not lead to happiness. So for them to think that education is to find happiness, they might think that education will negate truth sometimes.
No, you've decided.
But I know people who think that.
No, you've decided what's true and right already. So I'm saying, let's say we don't know what's true and right. Okay. The point is that I want to
go the other way around, because if we don't know what's true and right, or what produces happiness, we shouldn't seek happiness first. We should seek truth and right first. But
no, I agree with you. The point is, what I'm saying is
so it would be a marvelous discovery to discover that happiness and truth and what is right are actually the same thing.
Let me use this example, right? Let's just try this thought experiment. Let's say getting to Pretoria is happiness.
Okay.
Now, I would be deluded. Okay. I'll be wrong. And so let us say I get to Pretoria and it's not happy.
Okay. Then you were deluded, or you mistaken.
So the two states, so I could just be wrong. There's nothing wrong with being wrong. Okay. If I was at Pretoria and I was thinking, oh, this is happiness. This
well, it is more than Johannesburg, but okay.
Let's not go, well, we'll have that. But the issue is, if I get to Pretoria and I think this is happiness, I suppose, well, the point is that I would then get to that point and ask, is this really how happy I can be? Okay. And then I would have to think, okay, well, there's something else to be happy. Okay. So then I would then have to say, I must now search for that. What is the thing that really makes me happy? In the practical, but the end that I'm still searching for the whole time is happiness. So I'll use so this is an assertion that I'll insert in here, okay, just to give you just to maybe look at the insertion that we're looking at would be So I'll go here reluctantly because you're leading me here. I'll go here reluctantly. But St. Augustine says, our hearts will not rest until they rest in thee. Okay. So for St. Augustine would argue that the end of that happiness is only in and this is actually a classical argument, that happiness lies in the contemplation of God. But I don't want to go that route, and I'm not presupposing that route for this discussion. I'm just saying
that's one way the question has been answered.
Yeah. So all I'm saying is that, but what I want to focus on is this idea that the purpose of education is to know what it is to be happy.
Okay.
To know how to become. So you don't know how it is to be happy, but to know what the purpose of education is, to know how to be happy. So we could test it. So we could just test it with the idea of, are you really going to be happy in that circle, which is get high marks, go to school to get high marks, go to school to go to university, and then is that true? Are those people going to truly be happy?
Yeah. No, and I think I agree with you, because I think people, the only reason I'm afraid of using the happiness as the goal is because technically I think you can only be truly happy if happiness is not always your explicit goal. If you are willing to value other things higher than your own happiness, but that will actually in the end still lead to your happiness. Okay. But that does not undermine your definition of the thing, because it's still about how to learn to be happy. But you may perhaps learn that to be happy, you must not always aim for it directly. You must aim for other things more.
No, we must always aim for happiness, okay? And we must always try and experience happiness, okay? But we must recognize that we won't here argue why this may or may not be, but that in the world that we live in, there will be some level of effort, discomfort, and struggle to achieve happiness. But we mustn't assume, so Maria Montessori, that famous quote is that, which I think we may have discussed before, is she gives this famous quote which says that an educational approach in which the child is not happy is one that is to be questioned. That's not the exact quote, but that's the concept. So if we see kids being very unhappy at school, okay, then we can draw the conclusion that this is not an approach, this particular school situation they're finding themselves in, or this particular homeschooling situation they're finding themselves in. It could be true of any of these systems. It's not conducive to the child's development. So we mustn't have the approach that happiness doesn't play a component in this, right? And so that's an important thing. That's important to remember, that's also vital. And we must know that there will be certain struggle and a certain discipline required for reasons which we don't need to go into these reasons. We need to argue them, but we all know this to be a fact, right? So if I do not study for the exam, I will not pass. And then I will have certain consequences. We don't have to wonder why that is. We can just know that at this stage without going into that more deeply. But the issue that you've got so you're completely right. So let's just use this example of working for an income. Okay, only under certain extremely rare situations would you not be only under certain extremely rare situations, if you did not study in order to earn an income, could you be happy? It's necessary to earn an income, at least of a modest sufficiency, to be able to to be happy. And for many people, either the inability to achieve that level of income, and sometimes maybe the excess of that income, could lead to unhappiness. So what's one of the most sort of illogical or disturbing things was during the financial crash, and no doubt it's possibly happened now. I don't know how much. I've been looking at the stock markets recently. Is that people whose wealth went down from 2 billion to 1 billion euros committed suicide because of the loss of wealth that they'd experienced. So that would seem completely irrational, because they had all the money that their children, their great-grandchildren, their great-great-grandchildren, their great-great-great-great-grandchildren would ever need to live an extremely luxurious life. They had, even though they'd gone down from 2 billion to 1 billion euros. But that was enough. That they had so much invested in that excess that the unhappiness that they were experiencing was so much that they sought to end their lives.
Mm.
And the same, actually, interesting enough, happened, particularly in America, in the Great Depression, where for a whole number of reasons we won't get into now, but people were so depressed at the inability to make money that many people committed suicide, and that it became a social phenomena of what they called almost sacrificial suicide. So obviously there's this need. So just in terms of perhaps, so this is not too esoteric conversation with people. So there is this need. So we're not saying don't go to university to get a job, although I have certain arguments about that.
I am at university. I am studying, but my only goal with that isn't to get make as much money as possible. It is so that my goal personally is I want to be sufficiently educated. I don't think university is the only place you can get an education, but specifically in my degree of choice as a economic thing, a thing that I can do as work, I want to be good enough at it that I can spend not all my time working, but a segment of my time doing that to get an income, so that I can have a family, that I can invite people to my house and give away, because I want to help people and bring them into my life, but then also have time for other things that I value highly. Right. So that's why I would want to educate myself.
And we'll discuss what the role of university should be, because there is this. We'll discuss about the vocational aspect of university another time, another deep discussion.
But I am studying something which is not entirely. It's not everything we're learning isn't just vocational. But I wouldn't have picked something. I wouldn't invest my money paying for an education, which would negate my capacity of getting some kind of income, or making it very low. So you wanted to sort of help you in that direction,
Yeah, but I mean, whether that should be at university or not is a different issue. We'll discuss that another time. Yeah. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is that while we're criticizing that approach, we're saying that that's not the end. While we're criticizing the approach which says all of this is only about making money, we're not saying that is the end. We're not saying that making money is not making money in order to have a modest sufficiency, at least, is not part of knowing what you need to do in order to be happy.
Okay. I think this was a great discussion.
Are you happy at the end of that discussion?
I am rather happy. I think we should still. I think we should stop. But I'm gonna leave one last point so you can think about it. I think many people would define education as the mental side of it as discover truth. And
there's no mental side to education.
The mental. I mean the mental definition. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I mean not the large scale definition, the one which we've now rejected. But in any case, I think happiness is a workable definition. I think we can talk about this again. I think it's I still like my definition a lot as well, but I do agree that it's too wide. But I would say it's part of that education plays a role in being a person who actually that goes efficiently in the right direction And I definitely agree with you that the right direction will lead to happiness. So then we do actually agree very much, but we can still talk about the nuance. But not
no, good. And what I want to do is I want to say that the only reason we kind of went off on that track a little bit was because, but I think the point that people need to, or what I would invite people to consider is don't worry about the conclusion, but just question this issue: is the purpose of education is the purpose of education not to know how to be happy? So I would say the purpose of education is to know how to be happy. And the question you must ask yourself, that's a bit directive. So let's say the question that you may wish to ask yourself, or the question that I invite you to ask yourself is the end of education then not happiness? Or I would say, to consider the question, the end of education is happiness, agree or disagree. And if you disagree, perhaps tell us what the other end would be. And then we can test it and see if that is actually true or false.
Yes, but just go back to your own definition. The end of education is to know.
Yes, to know. But
Yes.
but I'm using a contracted syllogism, because if we assume that education only is about knowing, then it's implicit. But I could restate it in that way if it makes you more comfortable. We'll expand the syllogism.
I think it makes it more useful. Yeah.
More useful. So let's expand the syllogism. I would say the question is: the end of education is to know what is necessary for happiness. The end of man, the purpose for which man lives, is to be happy. And if you do not think that the purpose for which man lives is to be happy, then insert another answer at the end of the equation and see if that cannot be challenged.
I agree with you. I would say that I think saying that the end of man is to be happy might be, to me, as too small a definition, but it at least is part of it. So to make the mathematician part of you, quick thing again is at least that is a subset of what man is supposed to be.
We'll discuss that another time.
At least it's a subset, but I think it hinges on the definition of happiness, and we should talk about that in the future. But thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, we'll take that out of an educational discussion.
Yes, it's not. Yeah, but thank you for joining us. I think this was an interesting conversation. Thank you, Christopher. You definitely bring a lot of insight to the table and a lot of knowledge, and I enjoy talking with you about these kinds of things. It definitely enlarges my knowledge, and it educates me. So thank you very much. I enjoy learning.
Okay.
And
Well, thank you. Well, thank you very much for the challenging questions. Thank you very much for the pushback. Thank you to everyone who's most probably stayed with us. If there's anyone who has still stayed with us,
thank you.
This very long, in-depth conversation. Thank you very much. And do the usual things: subscribe, like, and
tell us if you have a better definition.
And if you're a sucker for punishment, then come back for another one of these discussions.
Yes. Have a good day.
Go well. Good evening.
Bye.
Goodbye. Go well.